So just to get a sense of who is in the room, if folks could go ahead and in the chat share with us who you are and where you're calling from tonight, just so that we can get a sense of where folks are. Again, my name is Melanie. I'm calling in from Flatbush, Brooklyn tonight, and looking forward to speaking with you all. So let us know in the chat where you're coming from. Great. And so while folks fill out the chat and let us know where you're calling from tonight, we can go ahead and get started with tonight's conversation. And so again, if you are here, first of all, thank you for taking your time. We know there's a lot of ways you can be spending your Thursday evenings, and so we're happy to have you here. Oh, great, Ashley. It's great to have you here from the Bronx representing. We've got Long Island here. Debbie calling from Philly. Hello. We love a little cross-state solidarity, so it's great to hear you as well. Hey, Jennifer. Great to see you coming in from Corona. We've got Kenny from Manhattan. Great. It's awesome to have y'all here. Again, thanks for letting us know where you're coming in from. So again, while folks let us know where they're coming from, let's get started tonight. So we're going to really be focusing on how we build winning campaigns. And again, a lot of times when folks think about campaigns, they might think about electoral campaigns. So that would mean, a campaign for a particular person running for office. Maybe, that could be anything from the president of the United States all the way to city council members here in New York City, or, in wherever you're calling in from tonight. So that is one type of campaign, right? That, getting someone elected into office takes a lot of people power. It takes a lot of planning, and it takes a lot of coordination of resources. But tonight we're actually not talking about electoral campaigns. We're going to talk about campaigns around different issues that we care about. And so what that means is building out campaigns around the issues that we see in our schools, in our towns, in our communities, in our neighborhoods, and how do we actually make change around some of those issues. It can feel daunting sometimes to think about how to create big change. I know, over the last year or two, or maybe even longer for some of you, there's been a lot of energy around, making significant changes as folks look at changes like the climate crisis and other crises going on, and noticing that, something has to change. But sometimes it can feel a little daunting to figure out, okay, I know that I want to make these, sizable changes and, transform the places that I live. How do I actually go about doing that? And so tonight we hope to, dispel and make some of the, myths around doing this, and make it seem a little bit more easy for this to be something for you to be a part of. So if you've ever wanted to be a part of a push for systemic change, whether that's locally, at the national or international level, there are certain tools and strategies that we hope to share tonight that give you a sense of how you might be able to do that. So again, we hope that we make this idea of this big daunting idea of systemic change a little more approachable tonight. And so that's really the goal. And one other thing that I'll say is, as folks have questions tonight, feel free to put those in the chat. We hope to make this conversation, again, as conversational as possible. So it's always really helpful to hear from folks about any questions. So if I'm using terms that you're not familiar with, or even if you want me to slow down and re-explain something again, I'm happy to do so. And feel free to use the chat function to do that. You can also use the Q&A tab to leave any questions. And again, I'm happy to hear from you and hear about some of the work that you're doing in your communities. And again, maybe all together we can come up with ideas to help some of the work that you're doing right now. So again, why any of this matters, I sort of talked about that a little, but I just want to make this point really clear that if there are changes that you want to see in your school, within the place that you work, within the places that you live, that requires strategic planning, and it requires having relationships. And that is especially true for everyday people, for working class people, for folks who don't have unlimited resources to money and access and power. So when we talk about how everyday people make changes, again, we need that sort of strategic planning, and we need those relationships in order to win. We know that the forces working against some of the movements that we work on have a lot more resources than we do, right? Wealthy folks have tons of access to money, which helps them build campaigns, or they have access to local or elected officials that we might not have. And so again, it's not that our goals and our campaigns aren't winnable, but rather like we need to really sort of think strategically about how we can plan out what we want to do with the resources we have, how we can build the relationships we need to win. And again, how can we sort of build out this thing so that, it's not just us fighting for this, but it's truly a community-led fight. So again, that's why we're having this conversation tonight. So I would love to hear from folks who are joining us tonight. If you can drop into the chat an example of a campaign that has inspired you. And again, I'm open to hearing about any type of campaign, whether it's an electoral campaign, maybe it's a marketing campaign, maybe you love, I don't know, Dove soap ads, if you want to tell us about it. Or maybe there's another major issue that you see happening around your community or across the country that you're really moved by. So tell us a little bit about a campaign that has inspired you. I see a comment here in the chat that the Free Britney movement was moving, if that's considered a campaign. Yeah, I would absolutely consider that a campaign, right? Folks who don't know, the wonderful singer Britney Spears was in a conservator relationship, which meant that she did not have control over a lot of her life, including her finances, and a lot of other elements of her life. She was under the control of her father. And there was this huge movement of people outside of the Spears family to put pressure to releasing Britney Spears from that relationship and being able to restore some of her freedom again. And so again, that's a great example of how folks were able to organize. They used a variety of tactics, which we'll talk about. And now it's something that a lot of us know about, right? That even if we weren't involved in the campaign itself, we know what the concept of Free Britney means. Maybe we are among those who are excited to hear that she had been released from her conservatorship. So I think that's a really excellent example. I would love to hear a couple more examples in the chat of other campaigns that have inspired folks. I know for me, there's been a couple lately that are, I think, really inspiring. Everything from the push to cancel student debt. I think there's a lot of great work that's going around that. To, even more locally here in New York, there are campaigns to push to make public college in New York free again. And I find some of the organizing around that to be really inspiring. And then very recently, there was a huge win here in New York City for New York City taxi drivers who are largely a working class immigrant workforce who've been burdened again with this insurmountable debt. And after a lot of serious campaigning, including hunger strikes, blocking bridges, all sorts of actions, the taxi drivers won and got a lot of the demands that they had sought in order to provide relief to taxi drivers and their families from, again, the crushing debt they were working on. So hopefully this is starting to get you to think about different campaigns that you're seeing around you. I'm seeing another example in the chat around campaigns for reducing methane and how folks are seeing it in various publications and organizations. Right, that's great. And that's a really good sign of a solid campaign. If you are able to not only communicate that your issue to yourselves and your bases, but in different publications and getting different organizations to be talking about your issues. That's one way that you can tell that the work that you're doing is starting to resonate and grow, and maybe things are going in the right direction. So I think that's a wonderful example. Thank you for sharing that. I'm also seeing folks talking about hunger and homelessness. Yes, there are lots of folks, talking about ways in which, particularly in the pandemic, ways in which they could support their neighbors experiencing hunger and homelessness issues in the course of the pandemic. We've seen a lot of folks doing what's known as mutual aid organizing and making sure that folks are directly connected with resources. And then we see campaigns like the House New York campaign that's working on making sure that there's changes in housing policy in New York that don't push people towards the experience of homelessness. So again, I think there's a lot of great work there. And again, seeing folks talking about, I'm seeing Ashley in the chat mentioning folks organizing in support of Black communities and sort of stabilizing communities and making sure people are aware of issues. I think, again, another great example, we've seen tons of huge movement with the Black Lives Matter movement over the last decade and some change. And I think that's been, well, it's been one of the biggest social movements in US history with some real tangible changes that have been happening locally, nationally, and across the world. So again, I think there's a lot of examples of campaigns that folks are including in here that I think are really great to think about. And again, I want you to keep those in the back of your mind as you're thinking about some of the strategies and ideas that we're talking about tonight, right? Because even though campaigns can be built in all sorts of different ways, a lot of the campaigns we're talking about are going to use different versions of the strategies and tactics that we're going to talk about tonight as a way to organize for the change that they need. So keep that in the back of your mind, keep some of these examples and think, what are some ways that if I were designing these campaigns, what are some ways that I would set goals, or what are some ways that I would try to identify targets? Again, we're going to go into a lot more detail about all of these ideas later on, but I just want you to keep some of those inspiring campaigns in the back of your mind and think about how they've done it for themselves. So there's just a few things that I'm hoping we can cover tonight in our session together. So one, I just want us to get very clear on what exactly campaigns are, how we sort of plan them out, including our campaign goals, and then thinking about the organizing that we need to do to win. And again, I really stress the importance of mobilizing people and organizing folks, again, as a strategy that particularly working people, everyday people need in order to win. Because like I've mentioned at the top, the forces against us are very strong and very organized and very well resourced. So how do we sort of set ourselves up for success and planning? How do we build the relationships that we need to win? And how do we start to change the hearts and minds of folks to join us in our cause? These are all real serious questions that campaigns should be asking themselves. And I'll say not just at the beginning of the campaign, but throughout the course of it, right? Part of what's both exciting and frustrating about building campaigns like this is we are trying to actively shape the environment in which we are fighting for this campaign. And what I mean by that is if we are fighting for things like, ending student hunger, if we're fighting things like homelessness, if we're fighting things, like restoring free college in New York State, part of what we're doing is trying to win those tangible things, right? We might have specific goals that we want to win, but we also want to change, the political landscape that we're operating in. We want to make, the idea of free college not feel like something radical, but instead something that's, very sort of common sense to people and something that we can actually win. And so again, I say all that because campaigns, it requires a lot. It requires planning at the beginning, but it also requires us to be adaptable, right? We can't just have one strategy at the beginning and say, great, okay, we've got that, we're done. I've got my strategy. Now let's go and win the thing. No, we're working in an environment that's constantly changing. We're trying to, again, change the hearts and minds of, everyone from elected officials to students on your campus. We're trying to change the political environment so the things that we care about can win. And again, there's all sorts of changes that happen, in the news that are going to impact our ability to run campaigns, right? So whether it's a governor resigns and a new governor comes in, that's going to change the landscape if you're working on a state level campaign. Obviously, that's what just happened a couple months ago here in New York. So again, I want to emphasize that the work that we're talking about tonight, of course, it's important to do at the start of the campaign, but it's also something that's important to stop and ask yourself along the way. And I would really encourage folks that if this is something that you're interested in, make sure that you have people in your life who are a great sounding board and will listen to you and can provide you feedback on the way that you're thinking about going on this campaign. And again, someone who's recognizing that it's not just enough to plan at the beginning. We kind of have to be talking and thinking and planning all throughout. So that's, what we'll be doing tonight. So again, there are lots of ways to make change. So this chart here kind of shows a spectrum from, creating change that accepts the current existing hierarchies of power. They're using the term pyramids of power here. And so what that means is, right now there's a power structure in the country that we're living in where folks with the most money, often folks who are white or men or straight, etc., are at sort of the top of the pyramid of power. And so there are ways in which we can change the everyday conditions of folks' lives that accept those pyramids of power, right? And so that can be something like services, right? And so making sure that, folks have access to food pantries and different shelters and things like that. That could be an example of a service where that pyramid of structure isn't fundamentally changing. But again, there are some material benefits that are coming to folks. And again, as you move from left to right in the spectrum, you see that we're moving from a place of accepting some of these pyramids of power to actually challenging these pyramids of power. And so that's the side of the spectrum that we're going to be focusing on tonight, is not just about delivering things to people that make their day-to-day lives easier. That's certainly a part of what we want to do, but we also want to be creating change that fundamentally looks at, again, sort of how power is constructed and says, that's not right. It shouldn't be that a very few amount of people at the top control access to resources that we all deserve access to, and that really we all deserve to live with dignity. And so again, we want to be looking at strategies. For tonight, we're going to be looking at strategies that, again, challenge that pyramid of power, and again, are fighting for fighting for a tangible thing, whether it's adding more dorms specifically for students experiencing homelessness, or fighting for free college. We are fighting for those tangible wins, but we are also fighting to change the conditions in which we are doing that organizing, right? And we're fighting for these things, not just because it would be nice to have free college, but because we believe in things like everyday people having access to education and not having to worry about, are they going to pay their tuition bill or their medical bill this month? We want to say that that's no longer acceptable. It shouldn't be the case that only people in positions of power are able to, again, have their medical and their educational needs met. What we want to do is say, actually, that's a right that everybody has, and that's the reality we want to fight for. We're fighting for free college, but we're also fighting for a new political reality. So I just wanted to name that here. So let's take a look at some of the components of a campaign plan. So just a couple of things to think about here. One, any campaign plan is going to require goals. So we're going to want to be really clear on what our goal is. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then once we have those goals, we start to think about our strategy, including some of the folks that we want to target. And targeting just means these are folks that we've identified as having some sort of important role in the fight that we are launching, and how do we sort of think about their power as a tool for building what we want to see in these campaigns. And so we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. We also want to make sure that we're clear about the environment in which we are staging, this fight, our campaign. So we want to take a look at, again, what are some of the big issues that are happening? What are some of the hot topics that people are talking about locally? What are some of the things happening right now in the world that shape the nature of what we are fighting for? And from there, we develop a game plan. We think about the people and the processes that we need to understand in order to win. And then we think about our timeline. What are we going to do and when are we going to do it? So these are all important questions to be asking along the ways in a campaign plan. So in terms of goal setting, we want to make sure that we are, again, setting ourselves up for success by having strong and, as the screen demonstrates, SMART goals. What SMART goals mean are that we are looking for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound goals. And what that means is we want to be thinking, how do we frame what our objective is in one sentence that hits all 5 of those. So again, with being specific, we want not just something like, I want more people to, again, visit our tabling event on campus. No, we want to go from that to saying, by next Friday, we're going to have 5 tabling events where at least 20 students sign up to attend our next event. So that would be an example of getting more specific and measurable, right? So we're being specific, we're adding real numbers, we're adding real deadlines, we're putting it on the calendar, and we're also doing something that's measurable, right? So when we're starting to talk about what we want to accomplish, we are thinking about it in terms of something that we can actually, track. So like saying something like, I want more people to come. Okay, what if only one more person comes to your tabling event? Technically that's more, but maybe that's not the number that you wanted. So again, starting to get specific and measurable. We also want to make sure that what we are fighting for is attainable. And that's a tricky one, right? Because we are also, like we mentioned before, fighting for, a better world, a world that, doesn't just allow the wealthiest folks to have all access to resources, but where, all folks are able to, live with dignity and, live the lives that they want to lead. And so attainable is a tricky one to balance because we want to do something that is challenging. We don't want to just do, necessarily the most easy, low-hanging fruit. Maybe there are some instances where we want to do that, but oftentimes a lot of the issues that we're talking about are so deeply entrenched in, the history of systemic racism and, the challenges of capitalism in this country that we need to be able to think about goals that challenge those systems, but are also winnable in a time period. And so again, that's where if you're sort of struggling with the attainable question, that's where I think being, again, realistic and thinking about time are really important. So being realistic means thinking about the resources that you have. What do you and your team already have? What do you and the people that you're working with already, have, whether that's skills or resources, maybe it's access to, a campus classroom where you can have organizing meetings, all sorts of things. You want to be realistic about that. And then last, again, time bound is another way to think about what's attainable. If I'm trying to fight for a free college in New York, maybe it's unattainable to say that I want to win that by the end of January 2021. It's going to be a little bit of a challenge, right? I'm going to need to find about $7 billion to make that happen. That's kind of tough. But again, if I think about, I want to win free college in the next, 3 legislative sessions or whatever it may be, that starts to make the goal a little bit more attainable. And again, it's on that deadline. So just, again, these are just some principles, and this can be helpful not only in campaign building, but in other parts of your life, like as you're working on different projects, like think about some of these in terms of setting those goals. So again, using the free college example, I just wanted to share here that, let's look at the distinction between some of these goals. So, there's a difference between college should be free in New York as a goal, okay, versus something like by 2025, New York will restore free undergraduate education in all public colleges. What would you say are the differences between those two goals? I see, Ashley, your hand up. And if you're unable to unmute, you can just go ahead and add it in the chat. But for Ashley and other folks as well, I want to hear, what do you think is the distinction between those two goals? If you are unable to mute, you should be able to unmute, but if you're having issues with it, just go ahead and put what you're thinking in the chat, and I'm happy to address it there.
Hello?
Oh, you got it?
Okay. I think the difference is because college should be free in New York is just a simple statement. You're saying what you want, but you're not saying like specifically how you want it to happen, or you aren't saying specifically what you want to be done. So I believe that by 2025, New York will restore free undergraduate education in all public colleges is way more specific. It also sounds more intelligent. So I think like they'll be able to respect you much more with the second statement.
That's great. Thank you, Ashley. And yay, we figured out how to unmute. That's always a minor Zoom victory in there. I think it's Ray. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But Ray, if you'd like to go ahead and unmute, I'd love to hear what you're thinking.
Yep. I mean, it's very similar to what Ashley said. It's that college should be free in New York is an ideal, that it's a belief. It's not something tangible. The second one is a tangible goal. that people could agree on, whether or not they agree on the, like, whether or not they have the same beliefs. It's something that they actually want to create.
Got it. I think that's a really good distinction. And how do you think the second one, like in terms of trying to build out a campaign, it sounds like we think that the second one is a little bit more of a stronger goal. How do you think having a stronger goal like that might impact your campaign?
I think that people will be more invigorated, more motivated to work towards it, and it'll be easier to plan the campaign.
I think those are really good points. Thank you, Ray. Yeah, no, I mean, and I think you're bringing up an important point here, right? That goals are important for ourselves, right? In order to understand what we're trying to do. But goals are also important because that's what we're going to end up communicating to people, right? And so maybe we don't like present it to people as like, our goal is we want by this time to like, I mean, in some meetings we might sort of, talk about it like that, but also it changes the way we talk about our issues even more broadly, right? It's one thing to sort of have, say, a student-wide town hall where the idea is college should be free and folks can talk about it, versus like, hey, we're working on a campaign where, in the next 4 years, we're going to restore free college in New York and we want to bring you along with us. And so what do you think it's going to take to actually win this? I think there's ways where, again, having that specificity allows for folks to do more of that work. I see Debbie in the chat also saying the language in that second statement is stronger. Should is not as strong as will, right? And that's also important too. When we're talking about motivating folks to be involved in the work, we want it to, again, be something that's motivating, right? The idea of college should be free. Sure, I agree with that, but what do you want me to do about it? Whereas in that second one, that word will says, okay, this is something that's going to happen. And how do we use the resources, the skills, the knowledge, the creativity of, the people that we know to actually win on this? And again, I see Ashley agreeing, talking about how it's a long-term goal. Yes, absolutely. So again, all really important strategies there. Anything else to add on that? Well, again, I think those are really great comments, so I appreciate hearing them from all y'all. So once again, we start to get clear on the goals, then we're starting to get to the point where we are planning out how we're going to do this. And there is sort of this daunting chart up here on the screen with a lot of text and a lot of bullet points on it. But there's just a couple of key things that I want you to take away from this. So one, this is an actual chart that a lot of community organizers use. It's from the Midwest Academy, which is sort of a training ground for community organizers to learn, how to do their work most effectively. Again, knowing that we are doing our work up against a lot of real constraints and a lot of real fights. And so again, this is a way to start orienting ourselves and how we're going to do our work. So that conversation that we just had, we are really focused over here on the left column over here. That's talking about goals. And so we were talking about long-term goals, right? We know that in the next 4 years, we want to make free college for all New York undergraduates at New York's public schools. That, again, is an example of a long-term goal. From there, we also want to start talking about intermediate goals, right? Because we know that, especially with some more transformative campaigns that are out there, it's not enough to just say, well, if I don't win free college this year, then it's a bust. Like, no, we have to have a little bit more skin in the game than that. And so thinking through, okay, if we know we want free college to happen in the next 4 years, what are some ways that we start to get there? And so some examples of that might be, well, we know that a lot of students right now are struggling with mental health issues, and that, counseling can be really expensive, right? Especially for students without health insurance, and even those who have it, right? It can be really expensive. And so maybe one of our intermediate goals is, getting investment in, 5,000 new mental health counselors on our college campuses. How does that then transform our institutions and get us closer to our overall goal of free college? Or maybe we want investments in existing programs like CUNY ASAP, which is a program at the City University of New York that does provide free tuition, free textbook support, free Metro cards to swipe on the subway, and a whole lot of other resources to pass to make sure that students can succeed in school. And so again, maybe another intermediate goal is doubling the state's investment in that program. And again, these intermediate goals, we want to make sure that we're developing those in partnerships with, lots of different folks. It's great to sort of have your own ideas, but any sort of successful policy campaign, at least that I have seen, again, from everyday working people, requires a lot of partnership and planning. And so we want to start thinking about these intermediate goals that, again, start to improve people's lives in concrete ways. And really importantly, give people a sense of their own power, right? We want to be building campaigns that not only win for folks, right? And, again, give them access to free college, free mental health support, whatever it may be. We also want to make sure that folks feel as understand the power that they have and understand that when they partner with other people, they can win. And I think that's something really, really important in designing campaigns, right? And part of the reason for that is we want to build campaigns that are sustaining. We know that the things that we care about are going to take a long time to win. And so you want to be creating an environment for folks where not only are they going to see changes in their day-to-day lives based on the fight, but that they see themselves in the fight, that they want to stay involved. Campaigns can involve a lot of losses before you get to that win. And so if you're not demonstrating to people that they have power, that when they work with others, they can actually transform some of these really entrenched, difficult political systems that we have, you want to, again, be able to make sure that folks understand that and can see that, they don't need to be a billionaire or, the president or whatever to win. That again, with working with other people, they can start to change that. Ray, I see your hand up if there's something you wanted to add here.
Oh no, it was up from last time.
Okay, cool. And then again, as we look at some of these other categories on the chart, again, this is the Midwest Academy. You can search for them on Google and this chart will come up. It's something that anybody can look at. But again, there's a couple of really helpful things on here. I know a ton of text, but just a couple of things that stand out to me here. One is in this second column over here about organizational considerations. This is really just about looking at the resources that you currently have. Really basic questions. How much money do you have? How many staff or students or community members or family members, whatever it is, how many people do you have behind you? Do you have a space to hold meetings at? Do people, value the goal of your campaign? And do you have a good reputation? And do you have the resources to knock on doors and canvas for folks? These are all important things to consider. And again, as we're starting out a campaign, you might start to see a lot of places where, hey, I actually don't have those resources, right? I don't have a place that I could have meetings at. I don't have staff that can support me on this. That's not a reason to stop if this is something that, again, you really care about. Instead, that's just an area where you can then start to strategically think, okay, if I don't have these things, how do I get them? And again, if you think creatively, if you think about working in partnerships with people, if you start thinking about your relationships, you're going to be able to get there. And again, I want to look at this middle column here that's thinking about your constituents, your allies, and opponents. So this is really important too, right? I've mentioned a couple of times here how important relationships are in order to win on the issues that we care about. And so this is a really important part of the campaign planning process. You really want to think about, who gives a damn about what we're doing? Who are the people who are actually going to care about this issue? If you're getting to the point of, I care about an issue enough that I want to start joining and building out campaigns, then chances are there's someone else out there who's also going to think what you're doing is important and matters. So start thinking about who those people might be. you know, again, in the free college example, you know, that might be something like, you know, some of the obvious ones might be students, right? Students themselves are going to benefit from it, but it's not just students, right? So if folks can add examples in the chat, who are some allies that if you were trying to build out a free college campaign, again, we'll use New York as an example. If you can put some ideas of who some of your allies might be in the chat, who are some of the people that you might be able to motivate to take action with you? I named students as a group. Some other examples might be families, right? So parents who otherwise might have to, you know, pay for their kids' school or have resources there. They might have a lot to win from getting free college. Do folks have other examples of people who might care about free college? So I'd see in the staff, oh, that's a great example, the student financial aid office staff. Yeah, the folks who administer scholarships already, like, you know, imagine, you know, the work they might be able to do if college were free and they were able to connect students, not with just partial scholarships, but all the financial aid they need. That would be a great constituency. DACA individuals to advocate in general, really great examples. So those are, again, folks who, you know, with different immigration statuses, and they have done a ton of organizing to get access to college and other resources for folks. And so again, if college were free for everyone, that means that, you know, anybody regardless of immigration status would benefit from that. And so that's a great constituency to mobilize, and also show that the issues that we're caring about are intersectional and address a lot of people. I see also in the chat this idea of first generation people. Yes, so first generation students. I think these are all really great examples. And you can also think beyond, you know, the examples of, you know, students and campuses. I think that's a really great logical place to start, but you can also think outside of that, right? Maybe you want to activate, you know, members of different religious communities, right? You could organize in churches or mosques or temples or different spaces and start to appeal to folks about getting them involved in that. You might start thinking about employers, right? People, a lot of employers want more folks with, you know, more education to join their workplace. And so maybe there are ways that you could reach different employers to get them to, you know, join your fight. Or maybe people who work in different professions, right? And so you might be able to get unions and, you know, different, you know, worker organizations behind what you're doing, right? If their members were able to go to college for free, what would that mean for the union's resources? What would that mean for their workers? So again, thinking creatively about some of the ways that we're going to be able to connect with allies. And also, and we'll talk a little bit more about this soon, but thinking really seriously about who your opponents are, and you know, what is at risk? If you won your campaign, what might they lose? Because sometimes that's the nature of it, right? So in the example of free college, maybe the way that we start to pay for it is through increasing taxes on the wealthiest individuals in the state of New York, right? And so that would mean that our victory, winning free college, would have a cost on somebody. It would cost the wealthiest individuals in the state to pay, you know, maybe more of their fair share in taxes. And so you've got to think about that cost and think about how seriously will they organize against you because of that cost to them, right? And thinking about how strong they are and how organized they are. So how connected are they to maybe the lawmakers that we need to move in order to win this campaign? That's going to be really important. And again, we'll talk more about targets, but targets are always a person. And so who has the power in the different, in the campaign that you're thinking about? And what power do you have over them? And we'll talk about that more in a second. So you want to be thinking about your primary targets, and these are the people who have the most sort of deciding power in the issues that you care about. But you also want to think about the secondary targets, the folks who can actually influence that primary target, right? So it's not just, you know, the governor is out here and as long as we get her to act, then we're good. No, we also want to think about, you know, who are some of these secondary folks who can push the governor. Maybe we know that a particular chair in a committee has a strong relationship with the governor. or maybe we know that our governor like is, you know, always looking at media hits about her and like reading headlines about herself. And so that might mean that we want to like start placing, you know, articles in, you know, the different newspapers that she reads talking about, you know, why doesn't the governor support free college in New York? These are just examples of, again, ways that we can start thinking about how we can use our limited resources most effectively. Because, you know, again, at the end of the day, if I wanted to, I could be banging pots and pans outside my street corner and just yell about free college all day long and call it a campaign. And, you know, maybe someday I would win that, maybe in 100 years, I don't know. But chances are I would just be, you know, yelling on the street, banging pots and pans. And so the idea behind all of this is saying, okay, again, with our limited resources, what are some of the ways that we can use our resources, our time, our people power most effectively? And then tactics. Tactics are super fun, I think. And that's where we start to really imagine what our campaign looks like and feels like, and what it feels like to be a part of it. And so tactics can be everything from, you know, press conferences to, again, try to get some of those media hits. It can be public hearings where we testify about the need for free college. It can be workers going on strike. It can be education around the issues, holding teach-ins about the issues that we care about and getting more folks involved in the work. It could involve lawsuits. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't go that route, but people certainly have. It could be about elections, right? We could make the issues that we care about what's known as an electoral issue. So, you know, is the governor running on a platform of free college? If not, you know, maybe we start pushing for another candidate for governor who is. Like, these are all different ways that we can be thinking about tactics. And again, tactics to me are part of what can be really energizing and fun and things that people can tap into. And it's a way to make your campaign tangible. And I think it's a way to also build your base, right? Because once you start having events and actions and demonstrations and teach-ins and, you know, hearings and all sorts of things, you can start plugging people into that. And that's a really important part of being able to win campaigns. So again, we've sort of talked about some of these. I will just go ahead and share you on, this is an example of what's known as a power map. And so power mapping is kind of a way to do a lot of that work that we just talked about. So as you can see, there's sort of two axes here. There's one that's decision-making power. So the higher up, oh, let me go back here, and then that went too far. So as we go higher up, on this side, we are thinking about people who don't have a ton of decision-making power to people who have a ton of decision-making power. So that's one way that we organize this. And then we start thinking about the folks who are super in support of what we're doing. And so again, we're calling those the diehard allies on here, to people who are like kind of in the middle. I'm not sure, maybe I'm against it, maybe I'm for it, to the people who are really against what we are doing. So again, as you can see on here, so as we have those two axes of power, we see our agenda up here, which would be restoring free tuition at CUNY in this example. And then we also think about our opposing agenda, which would be cutting higher education spending in the state and actually increasing the price of tuition. So our agenda, free college. The opposing agenda is the status quo, which has been cutting state financial support for college students and making college students cover the cost of tuition on their own, rather than seeing it as a public good that we should all be investing in. So with those two agendas, then what we start doing, and this is again a real example of a campaign document, we start thinking about, again, who are some of these key players that we have here. So we have current governor in New York, Governor Kathy Hochul, on here. She is someone who has a huge amount of decision-making power, but she hasn't been super active in supporting this movement yet. And so part of our goal here is thinking about ways that we might be able to move her towards supporting the issues that we care about. We also see here this example of, a lot of Republicans in the New York State legislature. They have been opposed to the idea of restoring free tuition. And so they're sort of in this opponent box, but they don't have as much power as the governor does, right? In New York, Democrats control the legislature. And so the Republicans out there don't have a ton of power And so that's why, again, they are listed on here as, you know, an active opponent, but they don't have a ton of decision-making power. And again, you can kind of see that across the board with folks who support what we care about more, but like maybe don't have a ton of influence or have some influence. And then these folks in the middle here. And why this matters is that we want to, again, map out who some of our key targets are going to be. And so as we map that out, we want to think about where do we want to be spending our energy. If we see someone on here who's got a lot of power, that might be someone that we want to start thinking about, not just in terms of how do we move them, but how do we get, again, those secondary targets, some of the folks who are going to maybe be able to influence that person with a lot of power. How, like, what are some of the ways that we can reach them? So those are going to be really important questions for us to ask here. And again, this power mapping can also tell us, you know, where maybe we don't spend a ton of energy. So again, in this example of Republicans in the state legislature who are opposed to, you know, restoring free tuition, you know, we could spend a lot of our energy trying to get them on board. And that's actually, you know, a great like could be a really valid strategy, right? Trying to make free college not just a partisan issue, but maybe your strategy is you want this to be a bipartisan issue that, you know, even Republicans in the state join on, sponsor, whatnot. That's a real strategy. But you also might think, actually, the number of Republicans in the state legislature are so small that we're not going to spend all of the time that we would need to convincing them and, you know, telling them to put aside party politics and do things that are good for their district. And maybe we just focus on, you know, the party that is in the majority and just focus on turning the Democrats. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's thinking, again, what are your resources? How can you spend your time here? And what are different ways that you can win? And those are the kind of questions that you want to think about as you're thinking about some of these targets in here. So again, you know, as we think about all these components, we also want to then think about how do we want to launch our campaign, right? So you've done the thinking, you have a goal, you have a sense of who some of the key players are, you're familiar with your resources. You want to then start thinking about how are you going to be launching your campaign? How do you move this from sort of internal planning to external, right? And making sure that folks actually know what it is that you care about. Because again, when it comes to campaigns that everyday working people need to win, we need a lot of people power, we need a lot of attention, we need a lot of visibility in order to win the things that we care about. And we need to bring a lot of people into the work. We can't just win things like secretly, hush, hush, by handing people money. Like, we actually have to mobilize people. So again, there's a lot of ways to do that. I think a really important thing here is thinking about how do we message some of the things that we care about, right? And so the way that you might try to convince the governor of embracing free college might be a little bit different than how you tried to mobilize college students, right, around it. Maybe with the governor, you use an argument that, you know, free college will be an economic boon to New York State, and, you know, our economy will be so much stronger, and we're going to have all these more jobs if people have a college education. That might be a way that you message that, versus communicating with your base, where students might resonate that, you know, colleges are right. We have public education in K-12 schools that's free. It's increasingly expected of folks to have a college education. We're often told that for, you know, working class people, it can be a way to, you know, find stability. And yet, you know, college isn't free once you get to college, and it's been free before, and we can have that again. Those messages might, you know, land more positively with college students than it might with the governor. So again, thinking about how you want to be communicating to some of these different targets that we're talking about is really, really important, because the message is not going to be the same for everyone else. And so it's about being adaptable and figuring out how can you make the case in a lot of different environments. And I think that's really important. And then on that piece is thinking about who's delivering the message. So again, you want to be, as you're building out your base, as you're building out your sort of coalition of organizations that are like all in and support what you're doing, thinking about who within that network can actually make that case, and who's going to have the most impact. Is it going to be, you know, a policy analyst who's like writing papers like behind the scenes? Maybe. Or maybe it should be coming from students. Maybe it should be coming from alumni who now have a ton of debt and would love to see a world where, you know, young people don't have to experience that. Maybe it's hearing directly from families who've had to take on 2 or 3 jobs just to make sure that, you know, the students in their family can go to college. Maybe it's, again, hearing from employers. So if we are, again, trying to use this like economic argument to move the governor, maybe you want to think about, you know, who are some of the business leaders that she most values and getting them to start saying, hey, actually, I think free college would be really good for us too. That can be ways to start to motivate and make change around some of those issues. And again, so we've talked a little bit about tactics. I love tactics. It can be a really great way to start to have fun and be creative with your campaigns. There's all sorts of tactics that are out there. If folks want to add into the chat different tactics that they've seen, whether it's, you know, people striking, whether it's other direct actions, you know, people protesting outside of buildings, people organizing marches. Sorry, I'm so motivated that I just have to sneeze when I'm thinking about tactics. There's lots of different ways that we can move our issues along. And so that's what tactics are really about, thinking about that. So again, research might be one way that you're doing it. So again, in the case of free college, the New Deal for CUNY, maybe you want to do research on, well, how does the state fund college now? And, you know, who are sort of the main agencies that are in charge of that? And what are other states doing? We know that California, for instance, has free community college at a lot of its campuses. How do they do that? How do they win that? That can give us a lot of really good insights into our campaign. And so again, doing that research, starting to create fact sheets and informations around that, and then making sure it's accessible to folks. And so language access is a big important point here, right? It's not enough to just you know, do your research, but it's making sure that folks have access to that information is really key. Maybe you're really interested in the policy side of things. So again, you could think about different hearings that you could have people attend, or scheduling meetings with legislators. There's tons of groups. Again, if you're interested in the example of free community college that we keep, or free college that we keep talking about here tonight, there's a coalition, the CUNY Rising Alliance, that organizes around getting free college for CUNY here in New York. And so they could be having legislative meetings and you could attend and make the case about why this matters. Or again, you could do some recruiting and make sure that folks are calling their lawmakers to support a bill. So that's all really important. Again, getting our story out there is really important. So collecting videos or blog posts or quotes or whatever it may be to start getting out there that this isn't something that just a few of us care about, but that a lot of us care about. So these can be really important ways to, again, get that story out there. And then finally doing some of that organizing, right? And so, you know, maybe you want to do a virtual event in the Zoom times, or maybe, you know, soon enough we'll be able to be on campus again and you want to do an event on your campus. Like these, thinking about having these events is not only a way to sort of get your message out there, but to build more people into your campaign and get them interested in what you are doing. So these are a couple of different examples of ways that we can organize. There's tons of other ways to do it. But I know we are getting close to time here. So I want to stop the screen share and see if folks have any questions about what we've talked about or any reflections on what we shared tonight. How might you be able to use some of this information in your own life? Maybe you're still thinking about it, that's okay. Again, I think what we want to take away here is that these are strategies that you know, have had success. And again, the road to success is a bumpy one. It can take a lot of work and again, a lot of setbacks to get to that place. But we just hope that tonight you're leaving here with a sense of ways that you might be able to push for change wherever you are. is there any way we could please access this PowerPoint to help us start the campaign? Yes, I will send this link over to our YI team and they can send it over to attendees afterwards. So we are happy to do that. How do you know which businesses influence which lawmakers? Really great question. And that's something that, again, you're gonna wanna hear, like, that's where you gotta do your research. And where I would do my research if I was trying to understand that is like reading different news articles, right? Like seeing who the governor is meeting with, you know, figuring out like what, you know, big fancy business talks do they go to? And like, maybe you can find out who introduced the governor before she gave this like big speech there. Like these are all ways that you can find out. Oftentimes, especially for lawmakers who work closely with business, they might also have, you know, committees or other folks who are appointed from different companies to serve roles in the state government. So that can be another way that you can find out. And then last on that point, I'll also say that that question is another example of why I think it's really important to work in coalition with people, because even if you're like, oh, I don't really know who like influences the governor, chances are there are people around you in your orbit that they can give you a sense of who some of that is. I see another question in here about creating a power map. How can you really tell who holds more power, influencer versus legislator? Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, part of that can be sort of a technical thing, right? So if say a particular lawmaker is the chair of the budget committee that is going to have to sign off on $7 billion legislation, that is a way, that is a tangible form of power. So it can be things like, you know, the particular title somebody has, committees that they are part of, if they're on the board of a particular university, those can all be signs of someone who has power. But you're right, there are also people who have power that don't have sort of those formal titles, but maybe they're really influential. Like Cardi B, for instance. Cardi B went to CUNY, was a CUNY dropout. Like imagine if we got her to start talking about how important it is to get free college again. Maybe, you know, she doesn't have a direct line to the governor, but she can mobilize a lot of people on her online fan base to like start talking about our issue. And so again, you know, I think you can think creatively when you're power mapping. It doesn't always just have to be like elected officials. It can be a lot of different folks to mobilize issues. And again, I think that question also really gets at the importance of continuing to revise our campaign plans and, you know, revisiting our power map and not just doing it one and done, but like thinking about it at multiple points. So I think that's a really good question. Thank you, Debbie. And I know we are at time. So again, I really appreciate you taking your time out. I'm super excited to see what you're going to be building out. Again, we'll share out these resources afterwards, but if there's no other questions, we hope you have a great night and we will see y'all soon.